So, what about the political? Stephen Dedalus, speaking for James Joyce, said, "History is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake." Yet when we wake, we begin to see that history is not really a nightmare, but is part of the fabric of an indelible whole. We either teach peace or we teach war. Lester Levinson said that we are always either in release or in resistance. There's no third alternative. No matter what we think our intention is, when resisting, we bring suffering to ourselves and to those around us. We maintain the reality of our ego. We maintain the reality of our ego by belief in negative qualities we project on others. Like people who leave their cell phone. No. Projection. Projection is one of the most crucial dynamics at the root of creating an ego identity that has problematic qualities. And what ego identity doesn't have problematic qualities? Only through our interpretation of the perceptual field is it broken up into separate sense objects, thoughts, feelings, people, and so on. Everything we see in other people is necessarily also within us, and sometimes only within us. The very world of form appears only in mind as a reflection of the consciousness that enlivens it. Society is on its surface a toxic interplay of people playing roles and projecting out onto each other. J. Krishnamurti said, "It's not a mark of sanity to be well adjusted to an insane world." We can observe when we begin to suppress our true natures out of fear. Letting our true nature out is the way to begin to make society make sense. Sanity begins to return when we see that we don't really know who anyone really is and give them the space to just be as they are. More about sacred space. Space as we conceive of it exists only in our minds, but everyone around us has their own sense of the space they occupy. When we give others attention without wanting anything in return, true relationship and sensitivity to how they feel in their space emerges. Everything we need always comes forth from life, but we start to become blind when we strategize a violation of anyone else's space. Awareness of our boundaries allows us to assert our own sacred space and also to see when we're defending any mistaken beliefs. Like, we're defending some space which isn't quite so sacred. The insanity reflected in politics is the product of emotional defenses. People with power use it to avoid facing unacceptable feelings and to stimulate other feelings that cover up that fear. It's just a raging addiction, the classic definition for which is mood-altering behavior that has life-damaging consequences. If we're moving toward health, we will open to difficult emotions consciously and work to release them without reactivity. We can't change anyone's behavior but our own. We can, however, respond as we feel moved to assert our sacred space, including our shared collective spaces. When we don't resist or take things personally, if we act to stop others' invasive behaviors, then we do it with a high-quality no. A low-quality no is one which causes a reaction and then we get into a fight. A low-quality no is an example of behavior that's very unskillful, just as are all the invasive actions that we might intuitively say no to. There is a crucial difference between taking something personally and blaming someone for an action, or simply seeing their action as unskillful and withdrawing our consent. Blaming someone makes them the other, keeps us stuck, and triggers reactions that keep us in conflict. Any invasion of our sacred space is always due to unconsciousness. This is why, as Don Miguel Ruiz advises, we should never take anything personally. When we don't see an apparent attacker as being to blame, as being the other, or as being an enemy, it's easier to be skillful in simply saying no without resistance. As we wake up, we'll say no to manipulation and misuse of our energy more spontaneously. The ego-identified elites have a huge stake in keeping us asleep as we're their meal tickets. It will be vital to stay aware that none of this culture of domination is conscious and that blaming others keeps us asleep. Nothing is personal. Anyone who attacks us is seeing us as the other, a projection of their ego, threatening something they're attached to by identification. Making people other keeps us separate. The Hawaiian Huna spiritual tradition has seen that each of us shares responsibility for any projection that arises in our dreamlike reality, and created a ritual called Ho'oponopono, which means to make right, to heal the split. Ho'oponopono is a 4-part ritual that opens an empathetic and healing connection with any person, object, or memory that we feel any negative feelings toward. The 4 stages are: I'm sorry, I love you, please forgive me, and thank you. What's important is not the verbal formula, but it's going deeply into the feelings that are evoked as we work with it. Try it when you find you're holding energy with anyone else. You may be surprised to find that results can happen almost instantaneously. The humble shall inherit the earth. As people experience the freedom that comes from honoring each other's sacred spaces and from finding the integrity to assert their own sacred space without aggression, the new paradigm for humankind is being made possible. This is not rocket science. Simply following the path of least resistance and moving into the next obvious thing will make it possible for our natural state, with all of its aliveness and clarity, to come forth. It's always with us, at our very center, waiting to make itself known. So thank you, and I must give my thanks to the great non-dual teachers and direct path teachers who have made it possible for me to begin to make these realizations and to make this teaching come alive in my life. In particular, Eckhart Tolle, Adyashanti, Byron Katie, and Genpo Roshi.